I was on all these calls with these partners at VC firms, and they're like, "Hey, we saw you increase spend, like you doubled spend in like October, November, December, but we're not seeing that performance increase hit." And they were very skeptical. We had scaled the top of funnel campaigns, and it was kind of uncomfortable. I kind of had to stick by my guns. Like, we're going to see that come back. It just takes time where you do awareness and it rises all boats over time. Turns out 12 months later, all of those cohorts are profitable and they're just growing in profitability. But their whole contention was like, are we going to be able to see even ROI? You were spending 50K and you were profitable there. We weren't even spending that much money. We were spending 50K and we doubled it to like 125. They're like, how are you possibly ever going to be profitable on these cohorts? I'm like, it's going to happen. Like, you just have to look at how these have been progressing over time. That was why I identified MMM as a need. We need to be able to go to these stakeholders and show them with some numbers and statistically validated numbers that we're spending in this area and we are seeing an impact. And it's not just customers saying, hey, they heard about us generally through YouTube. We need to be able to show this prospecting campaign, even though we had no clicks from it, or very few clicks from it, led to actual down funnel conversions. I think this was probably October of last year. I get a DM on LinkedIn from this guy, Peter, who basically is like, hey, working with a team, we're ex-Tesla. We worked in the marketing department, scaling spend before the department got cut by Elon because they don't spend money on marketing. We've built a tool that helps deploy MMMs and interpret the data. Is this of interest to you? And I was like, yeah, definitely. Learned more. And essentially what they're doing, this really cool concept, is a company called Blue Alpha. They are incredibly smart guys who basically take the Meridian model and they will, for your data where you have a minimum data set for a specific DMA, they will deploy an MMM, like a model for every DMA, which you have a minimum data set, like size. If you don't, they will group DMAs to Midwest region, Southeast region, whatever. But they basically group until you have this minimum data set. So we have a New York State, we have a New York City, we have a Houston, we have a Dallas, we have an LA, et cetera. From one level, that's really helpful because basically they create these models. We can get really granular with where our performance is coming from in these specific markets. But what's really exciting is that they then take those models and they roll them up into aggregated models for like the US. So if we do want to just look at US, we can see performance in the contribution across all these different channels. At the US level, we can also go down to the DMA level at the most granular and state level for many. We can sort by, we have the granularity to go down to the ad level in some cases. Most of the time it's tactic. We tag all of our campaigns so we can see this is a retargeting, Google retargeting, Facebook remarketing, Facebook prospecting, et cetera. But that in itself was really, really helpful because that was able to kind of show the picture of like, what is the contribution from all of these channels. They're great. And that we also are able to deploy models. We have the same setup with this modeling that doesn't just look at purchases, but we also have it sign up level. So we can look and see, this is the contribution of all these channels to just signups. And then this is the contribution of our paid spend based on actual purchases. And typically there's a mismatch in some places between both of those. They take things like a couple steps further though. So just having the data and being able to see those percentages of how much each channel contributed there's a little bit more to do because then you have to do the interpretation of like, what do I do with that data? And what's so special about Blue Alpha is that they then take the data and they do a lot of that for you. So within each of these campaigns or tactics or however you're breaking out your campaigns, they will look at the effect, like the magnitude of the effect of the channel. So driving more conversions means higher effect, driving fewer means fewer. And then they look at the proportion of effect to spend. And so spend effect can be big. If you're spending a lot, it's going to be high. And if you're spending a little, it's going to be low. And by comparing the two, they can tell you where your impact effect is outstripping your spend effect, which means you should increase your budget. And to the opposite side, they can show us where we're overspending, where we could pull back our budget to be more efficient, to kind of find that efficient frontier, basically. That's incredibly helpful to, at a glance, be able to do that on basically a daily basis. We can adjust budgets in near real time for that effect. And they even have like a tool where it shows us like optimal budget curves. So kind of like Google, when you go into Google Ads and it shows you, hey, if you spent $30 a day instead of $10 a day, you'd be here on the chart. They have those curves for each channel broken down to the DMA level. If we wanted to do geo-targeting down to the state or US level, which is typically how we do it. The last thing that's really cool, their platform does experiment design. So this is like the last part. So not only can we tell where the budgets should be spent the most, when we launch new campaigns, because they have these models by DMA, they have a very tight view of like similarity and correlation between different geos. And ultimately in growth, like the ultimate performance experiment is the holdout test. Run campaign in one area, don't run a campaign in the other area, see if there's lift, between the two, keeping all else the same, and then you'll be able to assess that. And so their platform does allow us to do that. So if we have a new concept we want to launch, we basically will ask them, hey, like over the last month or whatever, which geos should we target for this test? What's the size of the budget for what we want to drive, for the channel, for the tactic? And it basically tells us, okay, cool. If you're running this new retargeting campaign, you're going to need 2 weeks and you're going to need $4,000 and you should run it in New York and the control will be Dallas. And so when we go into Google Ads, we can set that up. We can set up the campaign. We can geo-target it to New York or New York City or whatever. We run it for 2 weeks. And then their team basically will pull the report and gives us these wonderful, beautiful charts of the before and after and the lift versus the expected performance in the two geos. And will give us a statistically validated output. And then if it works, then we can say, okay, cool, we can confidently take this, and instead of spending 40 grand or 400 grand to just blitz this and to test it, we can just spend a relatively small amount of money, but then be confident that when we roll this out more broadly, it will perform well. One of the coolest things that I've been a part of here, we ran an out-of-home campaign in the New York subways. Very expensive. I think it was like several $100,000 to run this campaign. Never done out of home before. It was more kind of like a brand play, big swing. We get all these texts from people being like, oh, I saw your ad. I saw your ad. But we wanted to know whether it actually had an impact. And we asked the team, hey, can you run the numbers and look at New York between this period of time? And sure enough, they were able to find a statistically validated lift in both sign up and purchase conversion based on that campaign. The efficiency was very, very low because it's such a broad, huge campaign. But the fact that we were able to generate a statistically valid proof of lift from that campaign for this company was like unheard of. They were like, nobody has ever been able to do that before and show us. Like everybody has anecdotal stuff of like everybody, all these people said they heard about us on the subway, but no one is able to come back and show us that it did work. It drove an increase in actual performance. And so brandformance is the hot word these days. And it's just another way that we can really dive into that, but really, really bullish on Blue Alpha. Shout out to Peter Graff. You guys, if you're listening to this, should check them out. It's been really cool working with them and just to be able to see that data, be able to go down and dig deep. And now it's basically now becomes a question of like, we're working at such a sophisticated level that now the communication becomes a little bit more difficult because external folks want to see, we ran this test, it drove success, and like end of the day, that's it. And so like the paradigm they're not primed for is like, okay, we ran this test and it showed success in terms of like signups spiked right away. And so we saw that was validated and we scaled it. And we're kind of using the MMM as like a checksum at the end of the day. We can scale conversions really, really quickly through this like short time frame. And then we're confirming that these are quality through the MMM to just educate people on what statistical analysis means. And, probabilistic modeling versus deterministic modeling is really the key. It's like most people are still thinking through things around deterministic modeling paradigms. But we've seen really, really huge gains in efficiency by basically trusting what we're seeing with the data. Because at the end of the day, you have to trust that like statistics is a real thing and that your data, like the data is real, which it is. But like when you do trust it, you're kind of stepping on a little bit of a limb until you see the results. And then it's just been really, really great.